They were no mere lights in the sky, they were questions, waiting to be answered. At dawn on a chilly morning in August 1952, radar screens at the heart of Washington, D.C. danced with unidentified blips. Jets scrambled, controllers whispered. What the world would soon call flying saucers had arrived in the corridors of power. But this story begins not with headlines, but with a memo one quietly filed by the Central Intelligence Agency. Under the subject line, Flying Saucers. It was a time when Cold War tensions reached every high-altitude radar wave. The Soviet threat loomed, technology raced forward, and the skies were no longer empty. Across the United States, pilots, scientists, and ordinary citizens began reporting objects that defied description. In this febrile atmosphere, the CIA's interest was not just in the unexplained, but in the possible threat. A memo dated the 13th of October 1952 warned that if they are not enemy craft, it is conceivable that the enemy might take advantage of the confusion created by the flying saucers to use at his convenience some air weapon against the United States. Behind the scenes, these seemingly supernatural sightings were slipping into intelligence files, with titles as sober as Survey of Flying Saucer Reports and Flying Saucers Reported Over East Germany. As we trace this story, we'll uncover how far the CIA and the U.S. military investigated, what they concluded, and what they left unresolved. We'll also glimpse how ordinary witnesses, radar operators, and skeptics alike found themselves drawn into something far larger than a strange light in the sky. The first reports cited in the memo set a stark tone. The Air Force's August 1952 briefing claimed that, of thousands of flying saucers cited, only 7 had been explained. 20% remained unexplained, primarily because of the vague descriptions given by observers. That is the backdrop. A government agency that normally deals in spies and secrets, now confronting something neither entirely terrestrial nor easily dismissed. The skies were opening up in unexpected ways. Now, consider this. In the Soviet forest clearing of East Germany around 1952, an escapee and his daughter reported encountering a disc-shaped object around 15 meters wide, sitting in a clearing. The daughter described it lying there, illuminated and ominous. Intelligence officers began investigating. Meanwhile, within the CIA's Foreign Documents Division, it was noted that the Soviet press made no mention of flying saucers, raising questions not only of what was seen, but of what was not acknowledged. To the public, these stories were fodder for newspapers and science fiction thrillers. But to the intelligence community, they were part of a puzzle with national security implications. The memo asked, what is the present level of Soviet knowledge? What capabilities might they have? And how might flying saucers affect America's early warning systems? Yet, paradoxically, despite stacks of reports, the ICA concluded that no factual evidence existed linking the objects to extraterrestrial origin, Soviet secret weapons, or US classified craft. And so we stand at a junction. The sky is full of mysteries. Governments are watching, and the age of disclosure is dawning whether people realize it or not. The memo was filed away quietly, but the questions it raised refused to stay buried. Across America and beyond, new reports arrived, each more curious than the last. Military pilots claimed to have chased glowing discs that outmaneuvered them at impossible speeds. Radar operators swore the targets were solid, mechanical objects. Even astronomers, trained to separate science from superstition, began to admit that something was happening in the skies that no textbook could yet explain. In January 1953, a panel of scientists met under CIA supervision at the Washington National Airport. Officially, their mission was to review the flying saucer problem. Unofficially, it was to decide how much the public should ever be told. The participants included physicists, radar experts, and intelligence officers, and their conversations hinted at the depth of the mystery. The conclusion they reached would shape decades of silence. After reviewing evidence photographs, radar readings, and eyewitness reports, they determined that there was no proof of extraterrestrial craft. Yet, they also warned that the reports themselves could be dangerous. If Americans became obsessed with UFOs, they argued, the nation's defenses could be overwhelmed by false alarms. The committee recommended not more study, but less publicity, and with that single recommendation, the age of secrecy began. News outlets stopped receiving detailed briefings. Witnesses were quietly discredited. The Air Force project, known as Blue Book, continued collecting reports, but now behind a curtain of skepticism. The CIA's interest never fully ended, simply shifted underground. In the archives, traces remain, small memos, scattered references, case summaries typed in the measured tones of bureaucracy. But beneath the language of intelligence reports, you can still feel the unease. One file describes a bright silvery object tracked over Alaska in 1954. Another references a report from England, where RAF personnel sighted a luminous sphere that hovered silently for several minutes before vanishing into the clouds. Across the Atlantic, the same sky seemed to hold the same secrets. The term flying saucer had become universally used by farmers, pilots, and soldiers alike. For those who lived through it, the 1950s were a paradox, an era of faith in technology and fear of annihilation. Rockets pierced the atmosphere, atomic tests lit up deserts, and the idea of visitors from elsewhere no longer seemed so absurd. And yet, the closer science came to space, the quieter the official explanations became. The CIA memo had not solved the mystery. It had redefined it. Flying saucers, as a phrase, became a symbol of what could not be publicly admitted. Researchers inside the agency debated whether the phenomenon might be psychological mass, misinterpretation of natural events, saw something deliberately engineered to test American reactions. One analyst suggested that the objects might be prototypes of high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft, decades ahead of what the public would know as the U-2 or the SR-71. But that explanation didn't satisfy everyone. The memo had been written too early, before such planes even existed. How could witnesses in 1950 or 1951 have described discs performing maneuvers beyond the capabilities of any known jet? The contradiction deepened when intelligence sources in the UK began sending their own reports. Files later released by the British Ministry of Defence mirrored the American ones almost exactly. Unexplained radar returns, multiple witness cases, and eerie silences from official channels. Some British scientists proposed that both governments might be observing the same phenomenons, something global, not national. Still, both nations maintained their distance. The CIA continued to file reports under miscellaneous atmospheric observations. The British classified theirs under defensive. And yet, the world was changing. By the late 1950s, humanity had placed its first satellites into orbit. Space had officially begun. As the horizon expanded, the UFO mystery seemed to shift upward with it, from low-flying disks to lights beyond the stratosphere. But for those who had handled the original memo, the feeling remained the same. The documents may have been labeled routine intelligence, but every analyst knew they represented something more, a glimpse into questions that no government could fully control. The story might have ended there, in forgotten archives, if not for the decades that followed. When the Freedom of Information Act was enacted, researchers and journalists began requesting the old CIA files. Among the first declassified documents was that simple, innocuous-sounding one, Flying Saucers. It revealed little in hard evidence, yet everything in tone, the concern, the curiosity, the understated alarm, it was all there, preserved in typewriter ink. For those reading it years later, it felt like opening a time capsule from a world that was both terrified and fascinated by the unknown. The CIA insisted it had long ceased UFO investigations, but the declassified papers hinted otherwise. Analysts were still monitoring foreign sightings, still collecting reports, still wondering whether these craft, whatever they were, might represent technology beyond human reach. And this brings us to the question that haunted every desk officer who ever handled one of those reports. If the phenomena were not ours, and not theirs, then whose were they? Some witnesses went to their graves, still insisting on what they saw. Pilots described metallic discs reflecting sunlight. Soldiers told of bright orbs pacing their aircraft. Civilians remembered beams of light that moved against the wind, hovering silently above towns and deserts. These testimonies were not the fantasies of a single nation. They spanned continents, languages, and decades. In the quiet hours of 1957, a senior CIA analyst reportedly said to a colleague, "We can't explain all of them, but maybe that's not our job." He paused, then added, "Maybe some things just watch us back." That single sentence, whispered between agents in a smoke-filled office, captured the essence of the era, the tension between belief and denial, curiosity and fear. And that's where the Flying Saucers memo truly lives, not just in the CIA's archives, but in their collective imagination. It helped shape it. Stands as a reminder that even the world's most powerful intelligence agency once stared into the unknown and admitted they didn't have all the answers. The skies above the Cold War remain a mirror. Every light, every whisper, every radar echo becomes a question that stretches from Washington to London, from the deserts of Nevada to the moors of Yorkshire. We look upward, just as they did in 1952, wondering what might still be out there, waiting, watching, and perhaps remembering that first time humanity began to take its own questions seriously. Because maybe, just maybe, the CIA memo wasn't a record of what they found. Maybe it was a warning of what we were about to discover.